behind the bench, everyone. Or on the bench, whatever. I don't know, metaphors. Our reading, this responsive reading by Sophia Lyon-Fahs is the first memory of Christmas at church I have as a child, was this reading. Sophia Lyon-Fahs was a religious educator who worked for the Unitarian Universalist Association for many decades and who wrote many of our curricula, some which are still in use today. And she speaks about the sacredness of all life and the relationship of the birth of Jesus to the birth of all children. Please join in reading the italics. For so the children come, and so they have been coming.
Always in the same way they come, born of the seeds of humankind.
No angels herald their beginnings, no prophets predict their future courses.
No wise men see a star to show where to find the babe that will save humankind.
Yet each night a child is born is a holy night.
Parents sit inside their children's cribs, feel glory in the sight of new life beginning.
They ask, where and how will this new life end, or will it ever end?
Each night a child is born is a holy night, a time for singing, a time for wondering, a time for worshiping.
From the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary. And he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was much perplexed by his words and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give to him the throne of his ancestor David." Thus ends the reading. Please join in our next carol, stand as you're willing and able, and sing, "O Come All Ye Faithful." From Luke chapter 2. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. Thus ends the gospel reading. And this is Unexpected by Anne Weems. Even now, we simply do not expect to find a deity in a stable. Somehow the setting is all wrong, the swaddling clothes too plain, the manger too common for the likes of a savior, the straw inelegant, the animals reeking and noisy, the whole scene too ordinary for our taste, and the cast of characters is no better, with the possible exception of the kings. Who among them is fit for this night? The shepherds? Certainly too crude. The carpenter? Too rough. The girl? Too young. And the baby? Whoever expected a baby? Whoever expected the advent of God and a helpless child? Had the Messiah arrived in the blazing light of the glory of a legion of angels wielding golden swords, the whole world would have been conquered for Christ right then and there. And we, in the church, to say nothing of the world, wouldn't have so much trouble today. Even now, we simply do not expect to face the world armed with love. We do not expect to face the world armed with love, says the readings. But yet, we do try to arm ourselves with love as much as we can in the ways we turn and face this world. And part of that in this church is taking up periodic special collections for agencies in our city that need our help. And one among them is the Jackson Personal Care Ministry that provides toiletries, soaps, toothpaste, detergent to over 100 people every single week. And they do that based on the contributions of churches like ours. And so for that cause, we'll now take a special collection. From the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2. In that region, there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. And then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of great joy for all the people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You will find the child wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors." When the angels had left them and gone to heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go now to Bethlehem and see this thing that has taken place, which the Lord has made known to us." So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. And when they saw this, they made known what had been told them about this child. And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured these words and pondered them in her heart. and from the book of Matthew, chapter 2. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and we have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all of Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, quote, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judea, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel,'" end quote. Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for this child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. And on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. And then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Thus ends the gospel readings. And this is The Queens Came Late by Norma Farber. The queens came late, but the queens were there, with gifts in their hands and crowns in their hair. They'd come, these three, like kings from afar, following, yes, that guiding star. They'd left their ladies and linens and looms and their children playing in nursery rooms, and told their sitters, "Take charge, for this is a marvelous sight we must not miss." The queens came late, but not too late, to see the animals small and great, feathered and furred, domestic and wild, gathered to gaze at a mother and child. And rather than frankincense and myrrh and gold for the babe, they brought for her, who held him, a gold-spun gown of blue, and chicken soup with noodles too, and a lingering, lasting cradle song. The queens stayed late and stayed not long, for their thoughts were already straining far past manger and mother and guiding star, and child aglow as a morning sun, towards home and children and chores undone. Thus ends the reading. Our next carol is the first Noel. Please rise in body or in spirit. Ever since it was first published, the poem Amazing Peace, a Christmas poem by Maya Angelou, has become a favorite of mine as a Christmas Eve reading. And then a few years later, they published this lovely picture book, and so we've scanned in the pictures for you to see as I read it. Thunder rumbles in the mountain passes, and lightning rattles the eaves of our houses. Floodwaters await us in our avenues. Snow falls upon snow to avalanche over unprotected villages. The sky slips low and gray and threatening. We question ourselves. What have we done to so affront nature? We worry God. Are you there? Are you there really? Does the covenant you made with us still hold? Into this climate of fear and apprehension, Christmas enters, streaming lights of joy, ringing bells of hope, and singing carols of forgiveness high up in the bright air. The world is encouraged to come away from rancor, come the way of friendship. It is the glad season. Thunder ebbs to silence, and lightning sleeps quietly in the corner. Floodwaters recede into memory. Snow becomes a yielding cushion to aid us as we make our way to higher ground. Hope is born again in the faces of children. It rides on the shoulders of our aged as they walk into their sunsets. Hope spreads around the earth, brightening all things, even hate, which crouches, breeding in dark corridors. In our joy, we think we hear a whisper. At first, it is too soft, then only half heard. We listen carefully as it gathers strength. We hear a sweetness. The word is peace. It is loud now. It is louder, louder than the explosion of bombs. We tremble at the sound. We are thrilled by its presence. It is what we have hungered for, not just the absence of war, but peace, true peace, a harmony of spirit, a comfort of courtesies, security for our beloveds and their beloveds. We clap hands and welcome the peace of Christmas. We beckon this good season to wait a while with us. We, Baptist and Buddhist, Methodist and Muslim, say, come, peace. Come and fill us and our world with your majesty. We, the Jew and the Jainist, the Catholic and the Confucian, implore you to stay a while with us so we may learn by your shimmering light how to look beyond complexion and see community. It is Christmas time, a halting of hate time. On this platform of peace, we can create a language to translate ourselves and to each other. At this holy instant, we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ into the great religions of the world. We jubilate the precious advent of trust. We shout with glorious tongues at the coming of hope. All the earth's tribes loosen their voices to celebrate the promise of peace. We, angels and mortals, believers and non-believers, look heavenward and speak the word aloud, peace. We look at our world and speak the word aloud, peace. We look at each other and then into ourselves, and we say without shyness or apology or hesitation, peace, my brother, peace, my sister, peace, my soul. We're going to take a few minutes now of quiet, or not minutes, but a few moments of quiet prayer or meditation, each to have a personal time of reflection on this evening. And if you'd like to come forward and light one of our tea lights, I invite you to do so to remember something you're holding in your heart or on your mind. And you can also do that during the offering that will follow. Blessed be, and amen. Our church is supported by the voluntary gifts of members and friends, and so we're now going to take an offering. This is a voluntary offering, like all of our actions in the free and voluntary church, but it is the way that we support our work in the larger community and in these four walls. Every year, as I consider the Christmas story, I think to some degree about the plight of Joseph and Mary, about the not finding room and being turned away, about what that might look like here and today. I think about people who live on the margins, who lack the resources that one might see as necessary, just as Joseph and Mary lacked warmth and sanitary conditions that night that the Gospels tell us about. But this year, one of the things that came to mind for me is this wonderful drawing by Everett Patterson, a comic artist. It's titled Jose y Maria, and it shows Joseph and Mary in jeans making calls, trying to find a hotel. The nearby Dave's City Motel flashes a no vacancy sign in the background. It brings to mind for me the song Deportee by Woody Guthrie. Goodbye to my Juan, goodbye Rosalita, adios mis amigos, Jose y Maria. And the verse, some of us are illegal, some not wanted. Our work contract's up and we have to move on. 600 miles to that Mexican border. They chase us like outlaws, like rustlers, like thieves. I hear Joseph and Mary in that song, both in their struggle to find safe space for the birth of their child, but even more for what came after. Because we stop the Christmas story so often on Christmas Eve. At that moment, I stopped it earlier. That's where I stopped the service of the retelling of the story every year. The wise men come, they give the gifts, they leave, leaving the baby and family safe. But that's not the end of the story in the Bible. And what happens next is that an angel visits Joseph and tells him to flee. Herod is coming to destroy the child. And so they do become refugees in earnest, fleeing to Egypt, a strange land, to escape the violence. And violence comes to their homeland, the gospel tells us, with Herod murdering all the infant children in what's known as the slaughter of the innocents, or the massacre of the infants. And then we have these lines, only 7 verses after the Magi laid down their gold and frankincense and myrrh. It says this: "Then it was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more." It seems profoundly un-Christmassy to talk about that, but yet it is a part of the Christmas story, how the story ends with Jesus and Joseph and Mary on the run to Egypt and a great lamentation throughout the land as children are no more. There are people in our own world that weep the tears of Rachel. And Rachel weeps 3 times in the Bible. She's the almost sort of like the saint of Bethlehem at this point, because the first is that she dies there in Bethlehem giving birth and is said to be buried in Bethlehem, and she weeps as she dies. And then in Jeremiah, she weeps as the Jews are led into captivity on that same spot. She weeps for them going into captivity. And then the ghost, one might say, of Rachel weeps in Matthew at the slaughter of the innocents. Given that it was the Syrian census that led to Mary and Joseph being on the road, and that Bethlehem was part of that Syrian empire, it's impossible for me to think about this, Rachel lamenting for her children, the children dying, without thinking that Rachel must be lamenting again today, with the civil war still going on there in Syria, and the refugee crisis of people fleeing that violence for safer places around the world still occurring. Today, there are 13 million Syrian refugees now, after 6 years of war since the Syrian civil war started in 2011. And violence has slowed there, and some areas are more stable, but war continues. And there are still refugees awaiting countries to accept them. Finding information in the US, though, is difficult because we've stopped talking about it. But here's what I can say. Some of those are refugees within Syria, a vast number in Europe, and some have made it through our refugee policies and have been admitted to the United States. But becoming a refugee in the US is increasingly more difficult. A small fraction of that 13 million, 18,007, were admitted between October 2011 and November of last year. Things have changed and slowed down under our current administration. Michigan has the second highest Syrian refugee population in the United States, second only to the much larger state of California. Here in Jackson, we don't have many Syrian refugees. They mostly go to Lansing and Detroit and Kalamazoo, cities that already have programs and communities set up. But we do have other refugees here in Jackson. One of the newer initiatives in Jackson has been a home for unaccompanied refugee youth. I wrote more about this situation in my newsletter column for this month if you're interested in reading about it, and I can tell you more later. But this isn't your Joseph and Mary or Jose y Maria, but children fleeing their homeland, children unaccompanied by a parent. And we have a home for them in Jackson. Most of these children, like Jose y Maria in our image, have come across the U.S. southern border from Spanish-speaking countries, although they're mostly not Mexican, but from Central America. Of the 18 youth here in Jackson that I'm talking about, 10 are from Guatemala, 2 from Honduras, 3 more from Central America, and the other 3 are from Togo, Somalia, and Rwanda. Michigan takes the hardest refugees to place. We have the most open policies, so while some states say, we'll only take families or we'll only take women with children, we take the ones that are harder to find a home for. And that's just how we roll. So when it comes to refugee kids, we take the oldest ones. We take the 16-year-olds and the 17-year-olds. And of those 18 youth here in Jackson, all of them are 16 or 17. 17 of the 18 are 17. 12 boys in a group home and 6 girls in individual foster homes. They're in the system, so they're not what we usually think of as illegals, not really. Usually it's a paperwork process to get them moved from what they call unaccompanied alien child status, essentially, into official refugee status with visas where they're here legally. Usually what happens with these unaccompanied children crossing our country is that first they're apprehended by Homeland Security. Then they're placed in an organization like Samaritas here in Jackson. And then they're assigned an attorney who works through the system to prove they're eligible for special immigrant status. In order to get this status, they have to have been abused, neglected, or abandoned by a parent. But this is the case. The case is such that most children who flee unaccompanied by parents to our country are doing so because they are in one of those categories. What's happened in our current administration is that visa process to give these children legal status has ground to a halt. And there's no clear answer as to why, and no clear indication of when that process will start churning again. And so without any explanation or timeline given to organizations like Samaritas and Jackson, we have kids who are turning 18. And when they turn 18, they age out of this system for unaccompanied youth because they're legally adults. And they're put suddenly into a status in limbo. They immediately become an adult with no immigration status, and while they are in the system and known where they are and have lawyers working on their status, they are suddenly at risk of deportation. They have no green cards, so they cannot work. They don't have refugee status, so they can't get scholarships to college from government funds. They have no medical insurance suddenly, so also no dental coverage. There's no funds all of a sudden for clothing or for anything else. They can finish high school, which will keep most of them occupied for a bit, and they'll have to leave their group home with Samaritas, several of them who have been in that group home. Samaritas was formerly Lutheran Social Services, because it takes government funds, and as a government-funded organization, it has to follow the government's rules, which says that once these kids are 18, they're no longer youth, they're no longer minors, they don't qualify for the program. Of the 18 youth here, 6 of them turn 18 in the first 2 months of 2018, in January and February. 17 of them turn 18 by the end of the year. And this is a crisis in our community, which needs our response. And the response cannot be government-based. And so naturally, our solution must be faith-based. And the other churches in our community, primarily the Lutherans so far, and also the Presbyterians, are stepping up. And so housing for these youth has been secured with families willing to take them in. But there are still funds needed to help those families with medical expenses, with clothing, with other expenses who are hosting those youth. And they can't get any assistance from existing agencies, all of which are dependent upon some level of government subsidies, government funds, grants, and so forth. So I've gotten a special permission for us to do a special collection for that in January, and you'll be seeing that, those of you who attend here in January, so that we too can help. St. James Lutheran has said they plan to donate $2,000. The Presbyterian Synod is donating another $2,500. First Presbyterian Church has donated $2,600. And I don't expect we'll come close to those numbers, but we're going to step up and understand that while we are Rachel weeping for her children, we have some ability to change things for this small group of children in our community. I can't think about the Christmas story anymore without thinking about people fleeing situations just as horrible as the slaughter of the innocents, just as horrible as Joseph and Mary were fleeing when they fled into Egypt, a strange land where they knew no one. I can't think about Christmas anymore without thinking about what we can do to be the angels in people's lives that bring them not just salvation, but safety. I always conclude my Christmas Eve service with the words of Howard Thurman, talking about how after the service is over, after the celebrations of Christmas, the work of Christmas begins. And that's it exactly. If we want to celebrate Christmas, we need to live Christmas, do Christmas, become Christmas. And what that means is about living into the work that Jesus' life would become all about, living into the work of caring for the oppressed, whether it's anti-racism work or work for LGBT justice or prison reform or women's rights or advocacy for children against abuse. But at Christmas time, for me, that begins with the lives of those I connect most closely to his birth story, which is the refugees. Our next carol is O Holy Night, and there's a connection there in that the English lyrics were written by a Unitarian minister who changed the French lyrics a bit to make the song be a Christmas song in response to the biggest, most pressing social issue of his day, which was abolition. Most of the carols that we have written by Unitarians, like It Came Upon a Midnight Clear, you'll find that they have some way in which they must connect Christmas, not just to jingling bells and holly and ivy, but to the pressing issues of our world. Please rise and sing O Holy Night. These are the words of Howard Thurman. I will light candles this Christmas. Candles of joy despite all sadness. Candles of hope where despair keeps watch. Candles of courage for fears ever present. Candles of peace for tempest-tossed days. Candles of grace to ease heavy burdens. Candles of love to inspire all my living. Candles that will burn all year long. Now, please rise carefully and sing Silent Night. When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flock, when the candles have all been extinguished, the work of Christmas begins to find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among the brothers, to make music in the heart. Please join me in our unison closing song. The words are up there, although not terribly well lit right now.